Just before, I have a gentleman ask what kind of things we can using for the developing country, and I think it's number one is feeding a little bit more concentration, and then you immediately reduce the greenhouse gas. And the second one is if your country have unsaturated fat acid, and you can use unsaturated fat acid to feed, and not all the fat acid.
Yes, I agree with you because
we know inclusion of concentrate reduce gas, but the price of concentrated feed is very high. So my opinion, compared to concentrate, use of additives, especially medicinal herbs-based hydrogenic additives, it would be better for reducing methane gas. Because hydrogenic additives has multi-dimensional function. It will reduce methane gas. It will also dilute the nitrogen concentration in the urine, increasing the volume of urine, and it will also act for the groundwater quality. Because when nitrogen is diluted in the urine, the soil can trap it, the plant can trap it, use it. And if the concentration is higher, the nitrogen will release to the groundwater. So if you are thinking about the total economy, if we consider all the economy, I think, in my opinion, hydrogenic additive would be the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come and talk to you this morning. So I'll be taking you to another continent, taking you to Africa, specifically Southern Africa, and my presentation today is to make an argument that pastoralism, extensive livestock production systems that are basically based in sort of natural environments is a circular form of animal production that we should support and we can learn from. So I want to give you some context, is that the latest estimate is that 54% of the terrestrial land surface of the whole world is rangeland. It cannot be used for any other forms of agriculture because it's either too dry, it's too wet, or the rainfall or climate is too variable to have a sustainable or a consistent crop, for example. And this is part of an exercise that we are doing at the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists to show where the different rangelands are distributed across the world. In Asia, we have some of the meadows in the steppe. In Africa, the savannas or the deserts of Sahara or Namibia, the pampas or the Cerrado in South America, or the prairies in North America. We have different types of rangelands across the world. And these different types of rangelands are different indigenous groups that are managing these rangelands and animals. So when we talk about pastoralism, when we talk about rangelands, we need to consider it's a whole suite of many different peoples, many different ecosystems. And part of the international year, and it's a map that Professor Long also shared the other day, is that indigenous people have, by and large, managing indigenous animals. And these animals are used for livestock production. Whether it's the yak in the Kusi Banayas, whether it's the llamas and alpacas and the vicuñas in South America, or the cattle and the camels in East Africa or in the Middle East. These are different types of animals that are being raised in pastoral systems. And with this map showing the different indigenous groups around the world, it shows the 16 different types of livestock species that are being farmed by these pastoralists around the world. So the focus for me would be on these parts of Africa, the southern parts of Africa. And within these southern parts of Africa, pastoralism, as we know today, is largely in this semi-arid and arid environmental areas that are very much variable and various heterogeneous in terms of environmental resources. And these farming systems, if I should put it like that, have been adapted to these conditions. And these are just a map of the different types of sort of biomes that you get in Africa. And the tip of Africa is dominated by these very dry semi-arid areas, but also a lot of subtropical grasslands and savannas. In our region, it's mostly cows, it's mostly sheep, it's mostly goats. These are the animals that are very well adapted, and they are kept for many things. For the milk, it might not be at a very large commercial scale, but at the local household level, goats are very important nutrition for families. The meat that the livestock are being kept for, and also some other products such as the blood, the hides, the bones, and others that are being used. So they try to use as much of the animal or all of the animal as possible. Even though we have moved towards mechanized transport, towards electricity, there has been recently a very increased reliance on drum animals such as donkeys because fuel is expensive, electricity is extremely expensive. So these pastoral systems are still very much used or very much dependent on donkeys. And the types of breeds that are used, the indigenous breeds, are very much well adapted. They are hardy. Yesterday at the dairy goat farm, we saw boer goats that are actually from my region. They are very adaptable to very dry and hot conditions. So these indigenous breeds are kept for their purposes. And beyond livestock nutrition, these livestock products are also some form of income generation. And let me put it into context is that it's not about how much money you can make, it's about when the money becomes available. And for example, if you can sell one sheep, which is $100 to pay for your child's school fees in the beginning of the year, that's impactful. So it's not about the amount of money, it's when the money becomes important that makes the system so important. And that was just one example. So, and obviously the animals are also being kept for other purposes such as manure. We saw the example yesterday at the dairy farm, but also fuel to biogas, and then the importance of culture. For the Imba people in Namibia, if you have a lot of animals and they do the dancing, you can dance with the arms wide, but if you have few animals, you must dance like this. The status, the elevated status in the community is very important. Women play a very important role, often not being valued for their role in pastoral systems, but play a very important role, particularly for the milk herd, while the young men and the older men go and farm and the big herds, taking the animals to areas where there are bit of pastures. So the argument that I want to make today is pastoralism as a circular form of agriculture, considering 6 characteristics of a pastoral system: biological regeneration, mobility and adaptability, low external input, resource efficiency and waste minimalization, cultural and economic redistribution, and governance and knowledge cycle. And let's visit these characteristics in greater detail. So we often think about grazing as having an impact on the environment, but if grazing is managed properly, and in many pastoral systems, you can actually regenerate the vegetation. And scientific experience, for example, in my country have shown that when you have erosion patches, you can use your herd to restore the land, through the trampling, through reducing the gradients of the gully walls, through breaking the physical caps where the seeds can settle in, and you can have better grasses in a few years' time. But also, regenerative principles are to do with the ability or the impact that manure can have in the soil. A review that has shown that there's convincing evidence of the beneficial impacts of manure on soil growth and the growth of crops. But it's also common sense amongst pastoralists that you can use the manure to fertilize your land. Very important to pastoral systems is mobility. Remember, the statement that I made is In the beginning, their pastoral systems are in variable environments. So you had the season here, there's a lot of grass here, but the next season or the later part of the year, you have to move where there's another other grazing sources. And basically mimics what wildlife are actually doing, you know. If you see the wildebeest herds in the Serengeti in East Africa, it's the same principle. So these livestock farms are following natural cycles. So what they're doing, they're using environmental variability not as an obstacle but as a resource. If there's water there, we'll go there. If there's better forage, we'll go there. If there's diseases here, we'll move out of the area. So they're basically in sync with nature. And this is an example of research that we did where it shows that when there is fewer plant species at the lowlands, animals will go to the uplands to make sure they have enough food to eat. But mobility is also used during times of crisis. This is an example of a drought period where resources are so variable at different and in smaller spatial scales that you have to move around a lot to make sure that your animals have a lot to eat. Even though it's drought periods, all the resources still comes from the rangeland, so there's very little input. And it shows you the map at the bottom. If you take out all the herds and the grazing distribution, that they'll concentrate on the higher elevations because that's where the animals go during drought, and we consider that as key resource areas. Areas that are normally used during a normal rainfall period. Mobility is also used to prevent overgrazing. Yes, overgrazing does happen in here and there, particularly around water or around the pens or around settlements. But by and large, the movements ensure that you do not overgraze these systems. And mobility is not something that happened recently. That's an example from my country in South Africa, where even pre-colonial, before the Dutch and the British came to South Africa, there was long distance mobility into Namibia, into Botswana, into our neighboring countries. But as these borders came up, these colonial borders, these administrative borders, mobility had to adapt to shorter distances. But I'm emphasizing that mobility is very, very important in these production systems. And within these limitations, whether it's limitations imposed by administrative boundaries or by climate, by the socioeconomics, by the health of the animal, mobility can adapt. And these are some examples of adapt. It emphasizes that it's very adaptable as well. Very important. The second or another characteristic of pastoralism is the fact that it's a very low external input system. You know, there's minimal reliance on outside sources. You can get everything from the rangelands. You know, you don't need synthetic feeds or fertilizers, and fossil fuels are very much minimal. There's also the breeds that I think Professor Long in his talk also emphasized the importance of local breeds, and in this case it's the lower methane emissions that the breeds have. So you can get the adaptable breeds to your specific region from these pastoralist systems. But it's not only about the breeds, it's how you manage the breeds. You know, you need to know, you need to understand these breeds, when to take the animal out to weigh, what to do with the animal, when to have the animals reproduce and so on. So this knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, is extremely important. There's very low waste from the systems, and also there's a high level of resource efficiency. Some pastoralist areas, these meat, for example, are processed locally, and the distribution is within a village or at least within a smaller municipal boundary. Pastoral systems of farming, it's beyond agriculture. You know, it's the cultures as well. You know, a lot of these cultures have shaped modern societies. Livestock, it might be privately owned, but it is shared amongst people. If there's a bride in the community, if there's a funeral, if there's a ritual, people share amongst themselves. You know, so the benefit goes beyond ownership. And people also put their animals together, for example. It's about economies of scale, but it's also reducing the risk. If my animals are in different herds and a drought comes, the risk is a bit lower that all my animals will, for example, might die. There's also whether your animals, your herd have suffered suffer due to a climate, a dust storm, or drought, or a cold snap, or disease, or stop death, or anything, people come together and say, look here, we are giving you each one 2 animals. Rebuild yourself, you can always pay us back in the long run. So we have to emphasize that sort of, that the animals within a community is being circled amongst members of the community. Governance is very important because a lot of pastoral systems not on private owned land where one person, for example, can make a decision. It's largely on communal lands, traditional authority lands, where you have to work with your neighbor, the herd next to you. And if there is a drought in the larger areas, you need to negotiate with other landowners for access. We have these private, for example, farms that are existing that you can't just go there, you need to negotiate. And often during periods whereby you can't afford to pay to have your animals in another person's land, you can say, look, I'm giving you a few of my newborn lambs, So it's a win-win situation. Or I can provide my labor to you as a farm laborer. It's a win-win situation. And then I think central to the success of pastoralism are the herders, the people themselves. The people are very much knowledgeable on the local conditions. Whether when you take your animal, what time of the year, when to prevent your animals from going to that side because there are some sort of pests or some sort of diseases. So these animals, these people have centuries old knowledge that we even as scientists can learn a lot from. So the indigenous knowledge in the use of resources are very important. So let me recap with these few take-home messages. Pastoralism is a regenerative form of agriculture. It's not extractive. There's a lot of circularity going in there. Mobility is central. If you can't move, then you are stuck. Then the chances of you surviving are very low, unless you have a lot of money to buy things all the time. And these funds are not always available in these very distant, remote, and often marginalized communities. The indigenous breeds are there, they are very well adapted, and the breeds and the assets that we can use to improve livestock farming. There's minimal waste, and we also have to see pastoralism for its social and environmental value. It offers also lessons to climate change adaptation. Yes, we are experiencing climate change, but these pastoralists have been dealing with climate variability, natural climate variability for centuries. So there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from them. And then perhaps I'm talking about extensive livestock production systems, but those are also complementary to intensive livestock production systems. The genes that are flowing with these pastoral systems are very important and will be used in the intensive farming systems in the future. How to manage these genes, how to breed them, is also the knowledge exists. It's where intensive farming systems can benefit from. The lessons learned to adapt to climate change without adding fossil fuels to the problem. The lessons are there in pastoral systems. The manure that can be available for crops to be produced that the intensive farming systems have to make use of. So there's a lot of complementarity between extensive farming systems of pastoralism and intensive farming systems. So it's a form of agriculture that we also need to, that is there, and then we also need to make sure that it being sustainable. So, and my last minute or so, I just want to emphasize that the United Nations General Assembly declared next year the International Year of Rainlands and Pastoralists. There are about 200 to 300 million pastoralists around the world. About 2 million people benefit. We are, for example, based in cities, but we get the water from these catchments, and a lot of these catchments are rangeland systems. So we as humanity benefit from these pastoral systems. So it's no wonder that United Nations have seen the relevance of protecting rangelands and these pastoral systems. And if there's an opportunity for all of us as an individual or institutions to support this initiative, to make sure that whatever you want to recommend is part of the report that's going to the General Assembly in 2027. So please visit this website and let's all contribute towards the sustainability of the planet. Thank you very much.
you very much, Professor Samuel. Question? Oh, any question? Lady first.
Hello, that was a very good presentation. My name is Aditi, I'm from Italy, and I have a question around. Very often in our discourse we talk about the way to reduce at least greenhouse gas intensity is through improving productivity, and many of the things that are discussed perhaps are not that suitable for pastoral systems. So are there any thoughts within the community about the balance between greenhouse gas emission and pastoral systems? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, within pastoralist communities, they, in many cases, they don't know what methane gas emissions. It's not part of the conversation. But if you look at overall and the work that Professor Long and team has done, is that the animals that they keep in itself doesn't have such a high methane footprint, and the breeding as well between them. Studies have shown in my country that there is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions when you crossbreed. So they might not be aware of it, but their practices allow it. But then again, maybe just to add, within this system, for example, in South Africa, if these rangelands are not occupied by livestock, they're occupied by wildlife, and wildlife also have a methane footprint, you know. So it is not that, and we need to look at pastoralism beyond a climate change lens. It's the biodiversity, it's the water, it's the land degradation, it's the social, you know, it's all of those well-being. So within this whole suite of benefits, we can, in that case, make a case for supporting pastoralism. But climate change is very much important for it, but those technical language is not part of the conversation that others have.
Okay, one more question. Okay, around 2%. Just a short question, because we have limited
Yes, that would be very short. Thank you very much, Samuel, for this nice talk. We are all from Africa. I work in Kenya, and I observed that in the rangeland communities, the pastoralist communities, the health services, both for people, animal, and the environment, is very much limited. That's why we promote One Health there. So can you elaborate a little bit how it works in terms of vet animal health services for this particular pastoralist community in Southern Africa, where I suppose we work most of the time?
So parts of Africa, parts of Southern Africa is a bit more well developed than the rest of Africa, and we do have quite good sort of veterinary care, or at least at the policy level and institutional level. But surveillance work, that is one of the posters that you see there, is still very much done by pastoralists themselves, who use their indigenous knowledge or local knowledge to monitor any disease surveillance, but then they would approach the state or the government to intervene. Medicines are very much available. There's probably more than 90% reliance now on Western medicines, on commercial medicines in the area. So I think that is how they is managing this animal health from that aspect. But also the management, how you manage your animals, how you use the natural resources of plants, because a lot of these plants, for example, my country, we have 23,000 different plant species, and a lot of them have medicinal value. So learners are aware of this plant does this in the animal. There's an example of a plant in my country. If the animals eat it, within 4 hours all the internal parasites are dead. You know, animal people know about these things, so that's also the importance of managing animal health from a livestock management point of view. So it's a combination of many different things.
Thank you. One question.
I'm trying to be quick, but I'm curious about the potential impacts of the so-called increase in the green area in some particular regions that were arid or semi-arid in the past few decades. Is that something that you have seen also in South Africa, in the regions that you look at? And has that had any impact on the size or expansion potentially of these pastoralist societies?
So are you, for example, referring to the greening out as a whole, where there's been greening? In South Africa, it's getting a bit drier, but there's a change in the type of of vegetation from your more perennial shrubs to a grassland. So many parts of South Africa, for example, is getting a bit more grassier. So it's a bit better food for the animals to eat. But the grass are not as resilient to drought as shrubs or trees. So there's that sort of rock between a rock and a hard place. Yes, you get a better food now, but it may not last forever. So we haven't seen much of the greenery. We've seen a bit of a drying, but we have seen a change in vegetation composition.
Thank you very much. Professor Sambhav, please join me. Thank you. So next we move to Dr. Aditi Mercury, please. So she will present in the topic of innovations for transition to resilient climate, smart and healthy livestock system.
Mr. Chairman,
We check a little bit the program.
maybe this is for Khairul Basha, not for the tea.
The next
Presenter is
the next presenter Wang Chen.
A little bit change program because she have to present in
She has
another room.
something to do afterwards. Okay. Sorry about that.
no,
Sorry.
it's
Very sorry.
on the screen. His presentation was focused.
Okay, Dr. Aditi, please.
No problem.
Say it didn't ask. Say it didn't ask. Sorry about that.
No, no, no.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting us to this event. I am Aditi Mukherjee. I work with the International Livestock Research Institute, and I am presenting this on behalf of my colleagues who are all here. So even though I'm presenting, the questions can be directed to my colleagues who are here, Fred and Home and others. What we are going to talk here today is one of the kind of work that we are doing at the institute on transitioning to resilient and climate smart and healthy livestock systems. ILRI is, so let me just start. So ILRI is one of the centers of the CGIAR. CGIAR is the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, and ILRI is a member of CGIAR, International Livestock Research Institute. And our mandate is livestock research, as our name suggests. And we are co-hosted by 2 governments, one in Ethiopia, one in Kenya, and we have offices in 8 other countries in Africa and 3 countries in Asia, including in Vietnam. So these are some of the places we work, including our partnership with more than 50 partners in the region. Then we have staff which include permanent consultant, PhD, master students. Many of our colleagues are present here today as well. So again, thank you for this. So what we are going to talk here today, because our talk is in the context of climate change, that is, I think all the talks here have kind of focused on the challenge that climate change presents. I'm going to look at it from the lens of twin challenges that our region, the low and middle income countries face. And those twin challenges are, first of all, is low consumption of animal source food in the diet. So in majority of the low and middle income countries, the consumption of animal source protein is much lower than the dietary requirements, which leads to all kinds of health outcomes, stunting, poor maternal and child nutrition, etc. And combined with that, in the livestock sector, the challenge is that the low and middle income countries also have lower productivity, which then leads to higher greenhouse gas emissions. So much of our understanding and our discussion is from the point of view of these 2 things. Then we discuss a little bit about what kind of livestock and climate agenda that we are working with in ILRI along with our partners. I would very briefly talk about some of the innovations for climate change livestock agenda and go to our new initiative which we are calling the Livestock and Climate Solution Hub. For the hub, for many of you who are here, we also have a special side session happening right after this plenary from 10:20 onwards in a VIP room downstairs next to the restaurant, where we would be formally launching this livestock and climate solution hubs for our partners in Southeast Asia. So please, if you have time, please come and join that for more details. So the first part is nutritional deficiencies due to less consumption of animal source protein. These are some FAO data from our World in Data website. And it shows that Eat Lancet, by the way, a new Eat Lancet report was launched yesterday. This takes on from the previous report, which says that the optimal diet, animal source protein diet in food is around 334 grams per capita per person. And if you look at some of the selected low and middle income countries, almost all the countries have lesser than that consumption. Compared to that, if you look at the high income countries, the consumption is not only higher, but double, triple, and even 4 times consumption. So there itself, I think we need to root all our climate change discussions and livestock into this global inequity in consumption. And this is important because this global inequity translates into long-term human developmental challenges, including higher rates of maternal and child, like not being able to live up to their potential. So, and a new report has been launched today. I don't think there would be any changes per se in the animal source protein requirement, but this is kind of the big picture we always have to keep in mind when we were talking about emissions in the context of low and middle income countries. The other challenge that we have here is that relatively higher intensity of greenhouse gas emissions due to low productivity. And we think that ILRI and our partners agree that one of the best ways of changing that would be to raise productivity. So this is one of those low-hanging fruit. So a lot of our research actually focuses on how do we raise productivity using different things. I will come to that shortly. And in doing so, how do we also get GHG emission as a co-benefit? So many of our farmers, reducing GHG is not their priority. Improving incomes, improving production is. So our attempt is to always kind of show emission reduction as a co-benefit and not the main objective, because emission reduction cannot come at the cost of other benefits. So. Yeah. Okay, so I think something that I think this happens in all the conferences, particularly in the developing countries. Whenever we meet in these conferences, often our focus is on ourselves. What can we do to reduce our emissions? But as a climate change scientist, I was a part of the IPCC. One of the things that has been drilled deep into me as a scientist is to look at the climate change as a global issue and to look at the issue of common but differentiated responsibilities. It's very important to remember that not everybody is equally responsible for climate change, and therefore what one can do depends on that historical responsibility. This is a bit of a complicated diagram, do not go into it, and it's a bit tangential to what we are speaking, but I think it's extremely important to frame climate change within the context of global inequality. This shows kind of the planetary boundaries. Many of you may be familiar with the planetary boundary concept, and it shows that globally we have reached 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. Now there is a new work that was also released last week by a professor called Kate Rayworth, who works on something called donut economics. And instead of saying that we have reached planetary boundaries, which we have, no doubt about it, what this work does is actually then it apportions the responsibility of that breach among the countries by its income. The poorest 40%, so whenever you see red going up, the outer circle is the planetary boundary. So whenever you see the red going up, it means those boundaries have been breached. And what this work shows is that the poorest 40% of the countries are not really responsible for any of the breaches except nutrient pollution. The inner circle shows human welfare, and it shows that the poorest 40% of the countries, the red means bad basically, the poorest 40% of the countries, while they have very little footprint, have actually have almost very high deprivation on everything: food, health, education, income, etc. For the middle 40% of the countries, there is a more responsibility in terms of climate change, nutrient pollution, but also a lot of deprivation in the center circle. And then the richest 20% countries is where basically is the largest responsibility for breaching all the planetary boundaries, but those countries have also been able to fulfill their own human development requirements. So again, with that, so basically trying to say that a lot of the climate actions also have to be within the context of the global inequality, and the climate action cannot make it worse. So now coming back to our main theme, which is what do we do in the LMICs to reduce emissions while also creating other co-benefits. Within ILRI, we are aware that given the current nutritional deficiencies, demand for animal source protein will go up in these LMICs because they practically eat very little of it. So there are various ways in which we can perhaps meet the growing demand, and at ILRI we are into transforming smallholder livestock systems because that's where the livelihoods and the benefits are. I'll now go a little bit into Africa. Now after I made this slide, I realized I could have done a similar slide for Asia, but anyway. So Africa, these are the different kind of emissions that we see from the livestock sector in Africa. Large part of it is enteric fermentation. Large part of it is methane, followed by nitrous oxide and CO2, and all those break down. This was a slide that was also shown by Professor Ormias on day one. This is based on FAO, what actions can we take, and I have outlined some of the actions that we are working with partners at ILRI to reduce emissions, largely methane, but also others, and all of these actions have co-benefits. So for us, we focus a lot more on the co-benefits than on the methane reduction as a goal by itself. So productivity increases is something quite important. Breeding, feed and nutrition improvements, I think we had a lot of presentations here on that. Improved animal health, carbon sequestration, circular bioeconomies, and manure management are some of the work that we have been doing with our partners. So increasing productivity remains as one of the most proven ways, but it's very clear that it's quite challenging given the climate change and all the different impacts that there are. So we also have worked around early warning system. How do we reduce the impacts of climate change? I'll come to those in a bit. So the way we our mental map of what constitutes a climate stock livestock system is a climate stock livestock system where mitigation and adaptation happen hand in hand. And a lot of the mitigation work we are doing in pastoral systems around carbon sequestration, then in more semi-intensive system, emission reduction through feeds, through efficient low emission ruminants. A lot of the work happens in the animal health, better vaccine, better health, more milk production, therefore less carbon, less GHG emission intensity, then work around MRDs. Then we also work on the adaptation side, looking at climate tolerance and breeding targets. Then a lot of the work is around de-risking, which includes early warning systems, which includes insurance for livestock. We have a livestock-based insurance. A lot of the work is around prediction and also scaling resilient livelihoods. Our work is in semi-intensive crop livestock as well as pastoral systems, and the outcomes we hope are low emission development that supports all of that. So now I want to very briefly give examples of some of the interventions. The first one is around the work that we do in the animal health solution. Those are related to improved animal health and productivity, as well as managing infectious disease patterns. And studies show, and we need more systematic reviews in all of these, shows that all of can reduce emission intensity going forward. And it would also lead to absolute emission reduction provided that the herd size remains the same. Our second body of work is around genetic solutions. Those are focusing on productivity and feed efficiency, as well as direct selection for lower methane emissions. Some of the concrete work relate to global digital platforms and tools for breeding, scalable genomic prediction pipelines, as well as partnerships and networks. Our third area of work, and this conference has such a lot of very rich knowledge around it, is around animal nutrition solutions. So those are around genetic improvement of feeds and forages. Right now we have a project that is looking at feeds with lower methanogenic properties from among the seed banks of a number of CGIAR centers, including ILRI, SAADC, as well as ICADA, because they have gene banks of fodders in them. Then also feeding systems, the research on feeding systems, and we hope to answer questions like what are the best combinations given different economic condition and different local availability, etc. Then we also work on environmental solutions. Here a lot of our work, and I know some of you would be going to the conference that is happening next week, GGAA, Greenhouse and Animal Agriculture Conference, where we will be showcasing some of these work that we are doing in terms of establishing emission factors. A lot of the emission factors that we have in the IPCC are not based on direct measurement in these developing countries, and yesterday we visited some of the initiatives here in Vietnam of measuring those emissions. So we are also working with partners in some of these. Then we also work on restoring degraded landscapes using the circular economy principle that my previous speaker talked about. Then we have worked around de-risking livelihood systems. These include climate risk management and extension. We work on early warning systems. We also work on index-based livestock insurance and linking credit inputs. So basically overall livelihood improvements of household and other communities. Then the achieving impact is CGIAR and ILRI achieves impacts only through partnerships, only through working together with partners from universities, from NARS, and from the private sector. And another way we have been trying to work is being more active in the climate kind of spaces like COP and UNFCCC, so that all the various negotiation tracks that goes on, we are able to bring in the global South narratives on livestock systems, so that livestock system narrative is not like drawn with the same brush, because these are quite different between global North and global South. So we work on a lot of policy advocacy. So I want to conclude around urgent transformation of livestock systems is needed, and we hope to work with our partners for this and be a part of this transformation, knowing how important livestock systems are to our nutrition, to our health, and to the economy, etc. Then we also want to shift the narrative towards more things like adaptation with mitigation co-benefits or mitigation with adaptation co-benefit. We believe adaptation and mitigation are two sides of the same coin in the livestock sector. Then we are also quite keen on strengthening partnerships, North-South, North and South-South partnerships. This is where all the evidence comes together, all the knowledge comes together, what works in one place, but will it also work in another place? That kind of knowledge exchange comes in. We are working on strengthening MRV, particularly for seeing if we can tap some of the carbon markets. That is quite a new bit of work that we have started. And to bring all of it together, we are starting a new hub called the Livestock and Climate Solution Hubs. I just want to give you a teaser, but not go into it too much. Please come to our session after the tea break that's in VIP room downstairs, where we would be launching the hub formally. Yes, the hub is really about partnership, bringing everyone together, seeing what solution work. In the previous session, I know our colleague from Bangladesh asked our colleague from Taiwan what kind of feed works best. And in another session, somebody asked what kind of measurement system works best. And all those answers can be, of course, given from our experience, but the better, more evidence-based answer would be through better systematic initiatives at the hub to do a range of evidence synthesis. So I think I have finished my time, but we would be talking more about the hub vision. So these are some of the vision, better research, policy support, multi-stakeholder platforms, and scaling innovation. And some of the ways we hope to do that is to convene, to synthesize the knowledge that we already have, to amplify those messages in various quarters, and to influence policy processes. With that, thank you, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aditi, for her nice presentation. Very sorry because time quite limit, so maybe the question later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move to next presenter from Dr. Mohammed Akaro Basa. Please. His title, The Bangladesh Field Quality